I'm really looking forward to this episode of the Disability Comes to Church podcast. And I have a couple of special guests here, William Flaherty and Connor Salter. And I'd like to welcome both of you here. And I would invite each of you to kind of introduce yourself and explain your connection to autism and how you became interested in that.
I can go ahead and start first. It's actually O'Flaherty. The O's not my middle initial. But anyway, so I've worked professionally some. It's not had been the main focus of my job, but before I started where I'm at now since 2009, I had done some work with kids with autism. And then in shifting to the type of work I do still within counseling, I would occasionally get some families with kids, because that's the primary focus, and that they had autism. But since that's not what our company was specialized in, it wasn't too common. But then in the last 6 to 8 months, we were getting some kids that were either just recently diagnosed or were in need of being diagnosed. And in terms of connecting them with a place that didn't have a long waiting list, came across a new place that I wasn't aware of, wasn't sure how long they had been doing assessments. And so they actually do adult assessments, and through a chain of events of like wondering about whether or not I might fit that profile, so to speak. I had wondered it about 20 years ago, almost, when I was going through some major transitions in my life, and I couldn't find anyone that did it. And then so I did, and I just was officially diagnosed with the level 1 autism at the end of February of 2024 this year.
Okay, well, congratulations. And I'll explain why I say congratulations in a moment, but I'll turn things over to Connor.
Yeah, thank you. So, yes, I'm Connor, and I'm a writer and editor, and my story, the short version of my story is that I have not been diagnosed with autism, but I'm still on the journey of deciding, should I get diagnosed? That's been partly because I had a bit of a shift in my life the last few years, where quite a lot of the work I do on in my side projects is book reviewing for church blogs, things of that nature. And that meant getting a lot of books since 2020 or so, with titles like Disability and the Way of Jesus, Hurting Yet Whole, On the Spectrum, which pushed me to rethink, how do I feel about welcoming people with disabilities. And alongside that, I gained a brother-in-law, Levi Anderson, who's appeared on William's podcast All About Jack. And Levi is legally blind, and he's doing a master's in disability theology. So that has meant a shift of pushing me to rethink, how do I understand disability? And along with that, my family, several family members asked me, have you thought about getting diagnosed with autism? Because that might help to explain some things. So those two things have put me saying, okay, I'm still figuring out financially how to make an assessment to work. I'm still learning about autism, but on a more broad scale, it's just been learning to say, okay, how do I become a better part of the disability and faith conversation?
Excellent. Well, it's great to hear from both of you. And I mentioned the congratulations there. And the reason I said that is not to make light of the journey of discovering about autism and getting a diagnosis, but I myself received my diagnosis, I think around, I would say about 9 years ago or so. And I have 3 children with autism. At that time, only 2 of them had diagnoses, and that was part of my journey in discovering it. I could recognize things in my children that there was some similarities. And my 2 oldest children are both nonverbal, but when I told my son, who would have been a teenager at the time, that I just was diagnosed with autism, he just reached over and shook my hand, and that was my way of being welcomed into the autism community in that way. So that's part of my story. But I think, like both of you, there was a period of time in which I was reflecting on that and trying to look at some of the things that were a part of my life, and is this me just being quirky, or is this something else? Is my tendency to get all into a particular interest just dedication, or is it a sign maybe that there's something else? And it can be quite a journey. And I'm glad you mentioned also some of the financial challenges there. While I was able to do my assessment for free simply because of the situation I was in. I live in Canada, but that doesn't mean that all of our assessments are free. But it just so happened that I had a family doctor who had the connection there, and I was able to get it. But I know of other people, even in Canada, who are struggling to find those diagnoses. The other thing that I noticed from both of you is the interest in C.S. Lewis, which is also one of my main interests as well. And I have found, in terms of my journey of autism and faith, that sometimes there can be some struggles along the way, and I found that C.S. Lewis has been a welcome companion, and there are certain authors that I have relied upon at certain points in my life, and then at other times I thought, this is not really reflective of where I'm at or my understanding of God, and yet C.S. Lewis seems to hold on. And I have encountered that with some other people. Any thoughts on why C.S. Lewis might be of interest to some people with autism?
Well, part of it, and this actually goes back to what I was saying about Levi appearing on the All About Jack podcast, is Lewis, one of his lifelong friends was a guy named Dr. Robert Havard. That was his medical doctor. Havard was also a research scientist, and he writes if you ever read the book, The Problem of Pain, Havard wrote the appendix at the very end of that book, which is a lot of meditations on, essentially what we would now think of as medical conditions or disabilities and how do they shift us. And near the end of his life, Havard, I think he spent the last decade or so living in, living on a disability home to try and care for other people who live there. So that, I think that connection definitely helped Lewis to be aware of some conversations. I also wonder if it may be that, from what I gather, he had some elements of his life were not easy. He had a very complicated relationship with a woman named Janie Moore, which lasted decades, and it started out very complicated and messy, and it became a lot less messy after he becomes a Christian, but he was still having to taking care of her, and she was constantly she was not an easy person to live with. They lived in the same house. So that seems to have, I think, pushed him, that process of being essentially a caregiver and almost a foster son, I think, pushed him through a lot of stress, a lot of struggles. His brother Warney talks about those quite a lot, and Warney gets quite upset about the pain Janie Moore caused sometimes, but it also seems to have, I think, it matured Lewis. A lot of people with his brain and his credentials would have been a lot more difficult as a person than he would have been if he hadn't had that. There's a kind of stretching that comes with that experience.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in terms of just some of the different things that Connor was just noting, that makes me think of just how accepting Lewis was or comes across in terms of mere Christianity, that Christianity is a big umbrella, and so regardless of denomination, different persuasions, he's very welcoming. And then of course his Narnia stories, in terms of just the way he tells a story. I know for me, which is not necessarily true of everyone with autism, and that is I don't really get into a lot of fiction. And so, yet he is one of the few writers that I've read, well, in Lewis's case, I've read all of his fiction, but it's with other authors. I've maybe only read one book, maybe two and such. And so he's able to speak to that side as well as the more rational side, which is something that people with the level one old term, of course, Asperger's would, gravitate towards. So that logical side of things in terms of things are one way or another. Of course, it doesn't mean that if someone has more of a one way or another type thinking that they have to be autistic, of course, but that is, one of those characteristics.
One of the things I appreciate about Lewis is that he does tend to speak to different areas of who we are in terms of imagination or reason or other aspects as well, which I think is particularly helpful for people with autism, because autism is such a wide spectrum, in the sense that some people will perhaps struggle with the reason aspect of Christianity, but might be able to grasp the imagination part. And then there are other people on the other side that may perhaps read even something like Narnia or the Ransom trilogy and get nothing out of it, and then pick up Miracles and think this is it. This makes complete sense now. And so I think that is part of it. I do want to talk a little bit about autism and Christianity. One of the things that I've encountered, and perhaps you've encountered this as well, mostly from neurotypical people who have suggested that people with autism, that it is more difficult for them to have faith. Have you encountered that? And has that been a part of your experience at all?
From my experience, since I was only, recently diagnosed, but of course I could reflect on people that I had interacted with. I unfortunately can't say that I've met very many adults that either identified themselves or they knew that they were autistic. So I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I know I've checked out some different YouTube individuals and come across some of them commenting about faith, and it seems like either I haven't caught what some of them have thinking about it, or some that are definitely no. It's not. I looked into religion, and I don't even know that there really is a God. Don't try to convince me, and so they're very closed off. But I haven't yet interacted with enough people or come across enough to really see whichever direction is more common.
Yeah, I can't say I've run into that stereotype myself, but I do wonder if it does make me think. I'm speaking here as someone who was born in 1996, which makes me the youngest here of millennials. And what I find often, my church background is kind of complicated because I'm a second generation missionary kid. But what I find talking to other millennials, people in their late 20s, 30s, is that most of them grew up in the kind of church Rich Mullins kind of poked fun at as being the kind of, we have our perfect family in our perfect suburbs and our perfect church camps and perfect private Christian school. And if we have problems, we just pray them away. So that model, which I've seen a lot of friends try to see, how do we challenge that, nuance it, figure out how to treat life as more complicated than that vision, has been part of that, has been saying, okay, we sort of were raised with the idea that faith meant what I felt, and if I didn't feel something, I prayed for it. And that maybe makes it harder to understand autistic people if the way to put the space they're on the spectrum means they aren't high empathy or high sympathy.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah, I think that some of it does have to do with the kind of church context in which you're in. I grew up in a Anglican church that would have been on the definitely on the liberal side, and went off became an atheist in my mid-teens and then came back to faith in university, sort of a C.S. Lewis kind of two-step procedure of becoming a theist first and then becoming a Christian later. But I did find myself at one point in a Pentecostal church, and I was in a Pentecostal church for about 7 years. It was a struggle in that the expectation was that you were supposed to feel these things and to have emotional reactions. And, people would say, well, you should be as excited in church as you would be at a rock concert. And I would tell them that I was, because when I'm at a rock concert, I stand there completely straight with my hands folded, and I enjoy the music, but I'm not expressive in that particular enjoyment. And I also found that in that particular that one congregation that I was part of, I would have questions, and I would question what the pastor would say. Not usually, well, never actually to his face, but I would have questions about it, and I would mention that to some of my friends, and my friends would be completely shocked. Like, how can you question what a pastor says from the pulpit? That's not to be done. And yet I could never shut down that part of my brain. There might be certain traditions in which they would be more open to certain autistic traits. Not to assume, of course, that any group of autistic people are exactly the same, but there might be certain areas which are maybe more conducive than others. So when it comes to autism, one of the other things that I've encountered is that there often is an interest in Christian apologetics. In fact, some of the first Christians that I encountered who had autism were in the apologetics arena. Is that something that you've encountered? And do you have any thoughts on why Christians who have autism might be interested in apologetics?
Well, I mean, from a personal standpoint, I can say that, definitely apologetics is definitely something that I have definitely been interested in since I became a Christian when I was 16. And so I did want to understand, and I had actually even read some other material before coming across C.S. Lewis in terms of, I think the author is Paul Little, know what you believe, know why you believe, and things of that nature. But again, in terms of just people that identify, I don't know the different people that I've followed in terms of apologetics that I knew if they were autistic or not. I know that Hugh Ross, Reasons to Believe, is definitely identified himself as being on the spectrum, but outside of that, I don't recall that I know of any.
Yeah, as I said, I'm still exploring where I am on the spectrum, but it would certainly make sense. It would fit my own story, because I know that, I was very into, I think I got interested in mere Christianity, must have been in my very early teens. And then I went from that to a phase where I was very into Lee Strobel. So books like The Case for Christianity, The Case for Faith. I went very into that kind of hardline, figure out the facts, apologetics approach through my college years. And since then, I think that still has been something that I've loved, but I've also been more interested in the presuppositional Francis Schaeffer approach, kind of figure out what is my worldview, what does it work, are there inconsistencies, and then slowly, as becoming part of a church, I now attend what's sometimes called recovery church. So it's a lot of people who have struggled, had rocky relationships before they went back to the church or came to it for the first time. A lot of what Brendan Manning would call the beat up and burnt out. And that has pushed me to, as a person, to go, oh, okay, I am really great with the facts. How do I grow beyond that to be someone who can also relate well to people and sit alongside you and sometimes mourn with you and relate to you well as you're going through whatever you're going through?
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that actually leads me quite nicely into the next question is, what What aspects of church do you find challenging as an autistic person, or do you find anything about it to be challenging?
Well, yeah, probably pretty obvious for most, and that is even those that are not on the spectrum but are just more introverted would be churches that have that welcome time where you're supposed to, turn around and, greet someone and that, fellowship time. Um, Now, I've been fortunate in terms of the different places that I've lived, in terms of when I've had to go to a new church and such, that they've always been very welcoming, and so I've been able to feel more comfortable. But in terms of just that is the first thing that comes to mind. I may think of something else later, but that's definitely something that's much more an awkward time. For me, I've been fortunate to, because of some other life experiences, got comfortable with speaking in front of others, and so having a hunger to understand God more and learn about Him, then I then want to help teach, and so I've been privileged to lead various Bible studies over the years and such, and so that's not uncomfortable because of other experiences that I've had that helped to make that comfortable.
Well, I can definitely I identify with that. However, I'm a pastor at a church, and so I usually don't have too much of a choice. I must get involved in the chit chat, and I know that for myself, that's the most challenging thing. I don't mind talking to people as long as we have a topic that we're discussing. I struggle with talking just for the sake of talking. That I'll do it because to welcome people into the church, that's part of what I have to do. But I'm going to definitely go home and have a nap after I'm done. But if it is on a specific topic that I think is worth talking about, and it doesn't have to be one of my special interests, I'm always open to learning about new things. I'm happy to spend a long time to do that. But the chit chat and the some of the stuff that happens in welcoming can definitely be a challenge. How about you, Connor? Any aspects of church that you find challenging?
Yeah, I do find worship, I find to be a challenging experience in that I'm always a little bit unsure of how much am I supposed to express here. If I can get very much into a song or an experience and I start doing a sort of a side dancing or moving my hands a lot, then I tend to get that tends to be easy. But usually that doesn't happen. So it becomes my mind is always off somewhere else, and it becomes, well, do I just sit with my hands kind of half upraised and just keep singing and just go with it? Or am I being disingenuous when I do that? So for that reason, I end up, the church I'm currently attending, because it has a lot of artists, it tends to have like murals on the side. You can go and pray. You can kind of reflect on a biblical scene, kind of, but not quite like icons. And there's usually a communion platter where I can pray. So that I have found mixing up the media of, okay, have something visual, take the communion. That has definitely helped me to feel more involved. But there is always the constant struggle. But it's also odd. I'm still figuring out how much of that might be an autistic thing and how much of that might be my weird experience, because my background is I spent the first decade or so of my life living overseas with with my missionary parents, who were in a group that was very big on one-on-one Bible studies. So a lot of small group stuff. So that kind of, let's get 5 people in a circle and talk about the Bible, has always been a much stronger experience of what it means to be in the church than being in an auditorium and singing. Somehow that's my initial touchstone. So it's that thing of, that's maybe another thing, is that get asked the question, okay, if I'm culturally from here and from there and a little bit of everything, I have to ask how much of what I'm talking with is being on the spectrum, how much of it is a third culture kid experience of being in cultural tension and how much of it is just something else. The layers we have to process.
Yeah, those are good questions because we are affected by so many different aspects of our life. So it is our neurological makeup, but it is our background, our culture, our education. There's so much going on, and it can be difficult to examine each one of those and to really know where something is coming from. If you were to speak to a pastor who had no experience with autism, wasn't aware of anyone in their church with autism, and they wanted to be more welcoming, and I think in our experience, we are what's currently called level 1 autism. At a previous time, it was Asperger's. So we'll maybe focus on this particular type of autism. But what kind of advice would you want to give them?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the expression, and I don't have in front of me who it's attributed to. I know one of your videos, you've mentioned this quote: "When you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism," and that is to recognize that first of all, that no two autistic people are exactly alike. There's the common theme in terms of what you need to meet in terms of getting diagnosed, which we may want to summarize at some point, or just refer people to where they can go to learn about that. But that would be also even something that I would encourage a pastor or a staff person at church to understand, because there is that misunderstanding that people that are autistic, or what would be ones that you might see more, you might be more aware of it because of the level 3 diagnosis, to where they require very substantial support, and so it's kind of more obvious. They are not able to what's called masking, to follow along with cues, and there are other conditions that may be the individual might be experiencing that has nothing to do with their autism as well. And so getting educated would be the biggest thing, and then to interact more with people that are on the spectrum, and then have them tell their story and experiences.
Yeah, I agree with everything William's saying. The only thing I can think to add is I might ask that pastor the question: what are they? Do they have groups at their church that does work with other disabilities, or that does addiction recovery work? Because although what you get broadly from those kind of meeting with people who are involved in those kind of groups is that puts you in the space more of, oh, how do I be okay with talking with people who don't have the experiences I have, who are working through things that maybe that might be lifelong things, and how do I learn to not be shocked anymore by that fact? Because that can, depending on what your church background is, it can be a little shocking to have the moment of, oh, this is something that there are people who don't get everything fixed by having it prayed for or getting the right medication for it. Some things are constant journeys. So that broadly opens your mind to say, okay, spending more time with people who have other struggles or disabilities or conditions, pushes you to say, okay, I'm not learning exactly how to help with autism per se right now, but I am learning how to be someone who is molded to have better empathy and to walk better alongside autistic people when I meet them.
That's excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate that advice. I think we can probably close things up about this time, although I'd like to have a conversation with both of you in the future about C.S. Lewis. I think that there would be some room to talk about that. But I was wondering if the two of you could maybe share quickly about where people might be able to find you and some of the things that you're involved in. William, we'll start with you.
Sure, yeah. Well, related to C.S. Lewis, everything that I do is centralized uh, essentially at the following website, which is called essentialcslewis.com. The brief hesitation is I know I'm doing some things with my YouTube shorts that by virtue of that, it's posted there, and then I ultimately put some kind of link there. So people may need to go to the Knowing and Understanding C.S. Lewis YouTube channel to find that. But you maybe won't get the latest things happening with the YouTube such material there, but you can definitely then hop over there to see if there's anything new. And then I did start a new YouTube channel that primarily is going to be shorts. That is adult autism in 60 seconds. I call it AA60 for short. And I've just had a few videos there now that basically help people that, one of the motivating factors there was I wanted to help crystallize and summarize for me to be able to remember the information that I was learning. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And then I hope to expand with some other things. Again, primarily trying to do it within the 60-second shorts format for people that don't have a lot of time, or since there's already so much other material. So if you do adult autism in 60 seconds, you should get that material from me. And of course, then I do a podcast version and then a Twitter thing, some things on Facebook. But if you go to essentialcslewis.com for the Lewis things, you'll get that. And there is a companion group for the adult autism in 60 seconds.
Okay. I'll make sure to post links to that in the show notes. How about you, Connor?
Well, I'm involved in a lot of things. A lot of the things I do for work, most of them are available if you go on crosswalk.com, including an interview I did with William talking about his YouTube channel AA60 and his autism diagnosis journey. I'm also, I do a lot of work with a group called Fellowship and Fairy Dust, which is an interfaith literary magazine. So you can find a lot of my work there. But most of my work is centralized under a website called gcsalter.wordpress.com. So that or my Facebook page is usually the best where to find everything.
Okay, well, I'll include those links as well. I thank you both for being on the podcast and appreciate what you're doing in getting the word out about adult autism.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Disability Comes to Church podcast. Please visit me at my website, disabilityandchurch.com, and consider subscribing to this podcast as well as supporting me through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/hopesreason. Even $2 a month will make a big difference. Thank you, and God bless.